Fuel prices moved from less than 200 naira to above 1,000 naira at some point under President Bola Tinubu's government, and the highest inflation that Nigeria has ever recorded was in the past few months and recently still under President Bola Tinubu. Can you tell us how these World Bank reports recently, because we are talking about the World Bank report, means for ordinary Nigerians that are feeling the impact of this inflation that I just mentioned?
Well, thank you very much. Yes, you're absolutely right that our country has experienced some jump in prices, literally across the board. But I think what matters most to our people is the prices of everyday things, food and access to basic services, transportation, energy, and all of that. Now, this has resulted in part from twin policies to remove the fuel subsidy on the one hand and to float the naira, to remove the dual exchange rates, which actually were two massive constraints on the growth and stability of the Nigerian economy. Now, this problem didn't start yesterday. To me, I say it's a generational problem. These are problems that have beset the economy over the years, over decades. But what we had was that the presidents who came along before this president simply didn't have the political will to make tough decisions that were required to set Nigeria straight and to really fix the problem at its roots. Now, this president came along and said, look, enough of this. We can't continue to kick the can down the road for the next president. And we can't continue to look the other way when these elephants in the room remained and were holding us down. We're completely eating and, making a mess of the foundations of our national life. So he made those decisions boldly, courageously. And I think Nigerians understand that. And they also understand that arising from those two decisions, those two policy interventions, that there would be, short-term consequences, some of which you referenced in your question. We've seen a spike in inflation, but these are temporary things which we expect will begin to normalize as they have started to normalize. For example, at the price of, again, this is part of the what we're living with. I mean, obviously, that the government is also tackling with the electricity concern. But just give me a moment, and I think they will have this, resolved to get the power back and running.
Yeah, so just the fact that there's no electricity tells us exactly what happens on a daily basis, right, George? We just
yeah, definitely. And then you've mentioned very painful economic reforms that the government boldly took. Could you explain how this forecasted growth will translate to tangible benefits for ordinary Nigerians? Because you see, it's one thing to say things are, on the trajectory of getting okay. But if we don't have electricity, if we're not feeling it translating to food on the table, then it is just good on paper.
No, well, in our case, it's beginning to look good on paper, but it's also looking good on the ground, and it's translating. Now, first of all, with respect to electricity, today, Nigeria produces and distributes more electricity than it has done in the history of time in this country. We've not had, a time in Nigeria where we produced, nearly 7,000 megawatts of electricity. Now, compared to what Nigeria needs, it may seem insignificant. But the point I'm making is that there's been steady progress to dealing with this question, to improving both the production and the distribution of electricity. And that's an indication of steady progress. Electricity is not, this is a service that is based on massive both, improvement in infrastructure, remodeling, renovation of existing infrastructure. So, obviously it takes time, but the government is pushing hard in that area. So, but moving away from that, when it comes to food, we're seeing now, the slide in prices of basic, food items that Nigerians need and consume every day. That is beginning to, again, show a downward slide, meaning that the macroeconomic progress that Nigeria is making, with the World Bank, I think, referenced, is beginning to translate into, meaningful benefits for people in their living room, on their dining tables. That's beginning to happen, and that's exactly what this, president said from day one. He did say, "Look, Nigerians, brace up. Things will be tough in the short term, but ultimately, if we don't fix the macroeconomic, basis, then tackling the microeconomic issues on a daily basis will not necessarily make tomorrow better. Will not yield any sort of measurable, sustainable outcomes." Which is why the bank is right that the economy today is showing signs of recovery, stable signs of recovery. Over the last year, growing at about 4.6%. Now this year, forecasted to grow about 3.6%. Look, I know, when you talk data, people who don't care, quite frankly, and maybe don't have any need to care, but worry about, just daily, their daily survival, their, livelihoods on a daily basis. Yes, it may not mean much to them in the instant, but make no mistake, unless we fix these massive problems in the economy, then the micro will never get better on a sustainable basis.
Yeah, definitely. And Mr. Morka, you'll appreciate, we've spoken to some Nigerians. You've mentioned that commodity prices are reasonable or manageable currently, but they seem to disagree.
No, what I said, I didn't say that they have reached a point where, if you will, the desirable point, the point the government or every Nigerian will feel comfortable. What I'm saying is that is beginning to, come down. And so when, for instance, rice at the highest point, was selling at over 100,000 naira. But today, I think, based on the last price systems that I reviewed, in some parts of this country, people now are able to buy rice for, under 60,000 naira. So in some areas, maybe 55,000 naira. So it is a gradual process. But as the economy rebounds, it will ultimately translate into a greater normalization. And also, don't forget that Nigeria, we're dealing with, challenges in the security sector. Boko Haram and all of the other non-state, actors are creating enormous difficulties for our farmers in parts of the country to return to the farm and grow food as they do.
Banditry is all-time high in Nigeria. It's affected all sectors of the economy. And just last year alone, hundreds of people were kidnapped in some parts of Nigeria. What is the President Bola Tinubu government doing concretely to ensure the safety of civilians? Can you tell us concrete solutions that the government is putting in place to ensure that civilians are safe?
The government is doing all within its powers to deal with that, crisis. But, while you mention all of the, the damage inflicted by these insurgents and bandits, we must also recognize a lot of the gains that the, Nigerian military has recorded, neutralized, tens of thousands of these insurgents and bandits as well, and freed and liberated a lot of outlying districts who have been under this menace for quite some time.